Hi, Lou here with some ruminations on what we call chess-like games, which is usually a term you see in tabletop games, but it can apply to video games, for example. A better term might be high reactivity or highly reactive games, although that's somewhat broader than chess-like. In other words, games where you have to watch and immediately react to what other players do. Obviously, in chess, the opponent makes a move. What you do is going to be based on what they have done. Now, this is as opposed to parallel competitions, which are sometimes called multiplayer solitaire, where you play your own game with little to no concern for what the other players are doing. Now, by their nature, most AAA list video games, which are single player games, are highly reactive. The player expects to do things. But casual games are less often highly reactive. Highly reactive games often involve maneuver and geospatial relationships. In other words, the player's move is something that's obvious. You can see on the board, you can see where they've gone. It changes the geospatial relationships. And so you have to consider that in what you do next. Highly reactive games make you think constantly because you're always reacting to what happens. Low reactive games, like parallel competitions, can let you drift off and not pay attention, like most party or family games. But also many current hobby tabletop games are of this sort. Video games less frequently let you drift off, especially because of their athletic nature, which I'll talk about in a moment. Classic games like chess, checkers, Mancala, Go, backgammon require immediate reactions. Immediate reaction is less likely to be required when there are more than two players. Now, what about video games specifically? Well, athletic wear generally requires immediate reaction to what's going on in the game. And by athletic wear, I mean games where it's athletic skills rather than thought that's most important to how you succeed. Like when you play StarCraft, you need, if to be a really, really good player, you need to be able to do 200 actions per minute. Yes, you have to think about what you're doing, but you don't have much time to think. And so it's the athletic part that's more important. Now, that might not be so true in some kinds of video games, perhaps team games in video, but there are lots and lots of video games where there's lots of movement and they are highly reactive. Now, athletic wear, where you're relying on athletic skills, is as opposed to thought wear, where you're relying on thinking, which of course obviously is something that's an aspect of chess. So video games are quite unlike chess, even though they're highly reactive, and that again is why I want to differentiate the terms. Now, what happens when you have more than two players? Some games for more than two sides, and I should have said two sides rather than two players, go the parallel competition route, while others can be highly reactive. Diplomacy, for example, which is for 7 players initially, is often highly reactive, but it's not real quick because between each turn, each adjudication of the moves, you've got 15 minutes negotiation. Nonetheless, during that negotiation, you're reacting to what has just happened. A tabletop game like Dominion is rarely highly reactive. You're playing your own game, but that differs on what cards you're using. And of course, video games for more than 2 separate sides are rare. And when they do exist, it's often much like turn-based tabletop games. These are usually online games. They may be real time, but they're still a lot like a turn-based tabletop game in other respects. And we can ask ourselves how much difference it makes whether a game is turn-based or real-time or even simultaneous adjudication, which is not real-time, but it's not exactly turn-based either. It's turn-based in the sense that everybody takes a turn and then pauses, but people aren't taking turns one after the other. Real-time requires even quicker reaction than in a tabletop game, but it may be a less effective reaction because there's so little time to think. And again, that's the opposite of chess, where you have some time to think, and where many people would want to have a lot more time to think, and that's why we have chess clocks, so the game won't go on forever. It's, on the other hand, harder to not have high reactivity in real time than in turn-based games. In the end, I'm not sure how much difference any of this makes. It depends more on the game than whether it's turn-based or real-time or simultaneous. Now, an aspect of chess-like games that we often don't consider when we use that term, at least the way I use it, is that chess is actually a puzzle. It's been proved that chess played perfectly always has the same result. Whether it's white wins, black wins, or a draw is not known, but it's always the same result. There is an always correct solution at every point. There's always a best move. Though the game is complex enough that at the start, humans cannot always figure out what that best move is. And a lot of this comes from the perfect information and no randomness of chess, which again is not something we often consider when we say chess-like, but why it's better to say highly reactive than to say chess-like. At least when I use a term, I'm thinking about maneuver and reactivity, not about lack of randomness or hidden info. I personally see little point in low reactive games, but some people prefer not to have to worry much about the other players. You pays your money and you takes your choice. Thanks for listening.